I do not require love, Lord Cavendish. I require a signature. The Duke of Ashbourne stood in the centre of the drawing-room, a dark silhouette against the storm raging outside. He looked at the three trembling women before him, with eyes devoid of warmth. "I will marry any of your daughters," he announced, his voice slicing through the silence like a razor. "Choose one, now, and your debt is forgiven." The father, desperate and broken, pushed his eldest forward. But just as the Duke raised the quill to sign his life away, the heavy oak doors groaned open. The girl who walked in wasn't wearing silk. She was drenched, covered in mud, and holding a shotgun. And she was about to change history. Northumberland, England, November 1893. The carriage did not slow down as it approached the rotting iron gates of Blackwood Manor. It was a black, funeral-like construct, drawn by 4 horses that seemed to exhale smoke into the freezing rain. Inside sat Damien Thorne, the Duke of Ashbourne, a man who owned half the county and was feared by the other half. Damien checked his pocket watch. It was a breguet, a gift from his late father, ticking away the seconds of his patience. He didn't want to be here. He didn't want a wife. But the terms of his grandfather's will were absolute. Marry before the age of 30, or the Ashbourne estate reverts to the crown. Worse, it would leave him vulnerable to his cousin Reginald, a man who had already tried to poison him twice. The carriage halted with a violent jerk. Inside the manor, Lord Henry Cavendish was pacing the floorboards, wearing a hole in the Persian rug. The house smelled of damp wood and fading lavender, the scent of genteel poverty. "Is he here?" his wife. Lady Margaret whispered, clutching a handkerchief. "Henry, are you sure about this? He is. They say he killed a man in India. They say his heart is made of granite." "We have no choice, Margaret." Henry hissed, his face pale. "I owe the bank £40,000. I owe him another 20. If I do not give him a bride, tonight we are on the street. The girls, they must be ready." He looked at his daughters. There was Beatrice, the eldest, 22, and strikingly beautiful, though her vanity was a jagged edge. There was Charlotte, 20, quiet and bookish, terrified of her own shadow. And Victoria, 19, who was currently weeping silently into her sleeve. "Where is Audrey?" Henry demanded, suddenly looking around. "She went to check the weir," Charlotte squeaked. "The storm. She was worried the river would flood the tenant cottages." "That girl will be the death of me," Henry groaned. "No matter. She is too plain, too stubborn. The Duke wouldn't want her anyway. Beatrice, stand up straight. Pinch your cheeks. He is coming." The great front doors boomed as the knocker fell. The sound echoed like a gunshot. When Damien Thorne walked in, the room seemed to shrink. He was taller than Henry remembered, removing his wet greatcoat to reveal a tailored suit that cost more than the Cavendish estate had earned in a decade. He didn't bow. He didn't smile. "Lord Cavendish," Damien said. He didn't shout yet, his baritone voice commanded total attention. "I am not a man who enjoys wasting time. You know why I am here." "Your Grace," Henry stammered, bowing low. "Welcome to Blackwood. May I present—" "Skip the pleasantries." Damien cut him off, walking to the fireplace and turning to face the room. The firelight caught the sharp angles of his jaw and the scar that ran through his left eyebrow. "I have a contract in my carriage. It stipulates that I will clear your debts entirely. In exchange, I require a duchess. She must be of noble birth, healthy and willing to produce an heir. Beyond that, I am indifferent." He looked at the three girls lined up on the sofa like porcelain dolls on a shelf. "I will marry any of your daughters," the Duke announced. "Tell me which one it is to be, and let us be done with it." The silence that followed was suffocating. Beatrice, usually so confident, looked as if she might faint. To be a duchess was every girl's dream, but to be his duchess, Damien Thorne, was known in London circles as the Lord of Winter. He was 30, incredibly wealthy, and notoriously cruel to those who crossed him. "Beatrice," Lord Cavendish said, his voice trembling, "she is my eldest. She is accomplished in the pianoforte and French." Damien stepped closer to Beatrice. He looked at her, not with lust, but with the clinical detachment of a man buying a horse. "Do you talk much?" he asked. Beatrice blinked, her eyelashes fluttering. I can make conversation, Your Grace. I enjoy the opera, and I prefer silence," Damien said, moving down the line. He stopped in front of Charlotte. She was shaking so hard, the ribbons on her dress vibrated. "And this one, Charlotte," her mother interjected eagerly. "She is very obedient, Your Grace, very pious." Damien sneered slightly. "I have no need for a nun in my bed. Obedience is useful, but fear is tedious." He turned to Victoria. She looked up at him, her eyes red-rimmed. "Please," she whispered, barely audible. "Please don't take me. I love Mr. Collins, the baker's son." Lord Cavendish gasped. "Victoria, silence." Damien paused. For a second, something flickered in his eyes. Not kindness, but perhaps respect for her honesty. "I am not a monster, despite what the rumors say. I will not steal a woman from a baker." He turned back to the father. "The eldest, then, Beatrice. She seems sturdy enough to survive the winters at Ashbourne Hall." Beatrice let out a small, strangled sob, but nodded. She knew her duty. "Excellent," Damien said, snapping his fingers. His lawyer, a small rat-faced man named Mr. Finch, scurried in from the hallway, slapping a thick parchment onto the table. "Sign here, Lord Cavendish," Damien commanded. "And the girl, she leaves with me tonight." "Tonight?" Lady Margaret cried. "But her clothes, the wedding. We will marry by special license in the village chapel in the morning." Damien said, his back turned. "I have business in London in 3 days. I do not have time for a parade." Lord Cavendish's hand shook as he dipped the quill into the inkpot. The scratch of the nib against the parchment sounded like bones breaking. He signed his name. Henry Cavendish. "Done," Damien said. "Beatrice, get your coat." It was a transaction. Cold, brutal, and efficient. The Duke had his breeding stock. The father had his money. The tragedy was complete. Or so they thought. The heavy oak doors to the drawing room didn't just open. They were kicked. Use heavy force, the latch gave way, and the wind from the hallway howled in extinguishing half the candles. In the doorway stood a figure that looked more like a drowned rat than a lady of the peerage. It was Audrey. She was 21, the youngest, though often mistaken for a stable boy. She was wearing a man's oversized trench coat over a muddied dress. Her boots were caked in clay, and her dark hair was plastered to her face. In her right hand, she held an old, rusted, double-barreled shotgun broken open over her arm. "What in God's name is happening?" she demanded, her voice hoarse from shouting over the wind. She strode into the room, dripping water onto the pristine floor, completely ignoring the Duke. "Audrey!" Lord Cavendish roared. "Get out! We have company!" Audrey ignored him. She looked at her sisters. Beatrice pale as a sheet. Victoria weeping in relief. Charlotte praying. Then she looked at the table. The contract. "You sold her," Audrey said, her voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. She looked at her father with pure disgust. "You actually did it. You sold Beatrice to pay for your baccarat debts." "I did what I had to do," Henry shouted. Audrey turned finally, noticing the tall, dark stranger standing by the fireplace. Damien Thorne had not moved. He was watching her with a strange expression. He had expected tears. He had expected begging. He had not expected a woman who looked like she had just wrestled a storm. "And you," Audrey said, pointing a mud-stained finger at the Duke. "You must be the buyer. Ashbourne, I presume, the one who evicts tenants if they're a day late on rent." "Audrey, stop!" Beatrice screamed, terrified. The Duke would have them all killed. Damien tilted his head. "I evict those who break contracts. It is a simple principle of business. And who might you be the stable hand? I am the one who just spent 3 hours digging a trench to save your tenant farmers from the flood while you stood here buying my sister like a heifer at a market." Audrey snapped. She dropped the shotgun onto a chair with a heavy clatter. "You want a wife, Your Grace? Take me." The room went dead silent. Lord Cavendish looked like he was having a stroke. "Audrey, you are insane. Look at you, you are a disgrace." "Beatrice will die in your castle," Audrey said, stepping closer to the Duke, staring up into his icy blue eyes. She was shorter than him, but she didn't shrink. She is vain and soft. She needs parties and flattery. You will bore her to death, or she will irritate you until you lock her in a tower. Victoria loves another. Charlotte is a child." She took a breath, smelling of rain and earth. "I don't love anyone. I don't need parties, and I am not afraid of the dark or of you. You want a contract. You want an heir. Fine. Marry me, but leave Beatrice alone." Damien stared at her. For the first time all evening, the boredom in his chest vanished. He looked at her muddy boots, her wild hair, the fierce, burning intelligence in her eyes. She wasn't pretty in the conventional sense she was striking. Sharp. Dangerous. He looked at the signed contract. Then slowly he picked it up. "Audrey, is it?" Damien asked softly. "Audrey," she confirmed. Damien ripped the contract in half. The sound of tearing paper echoed through the room. "Mr. Finch," Damien said, not taking his eyes off Audrey. "Draft a new agreement. The name is Audrey Cavendish." "Your Grace," Finch squeaked. "But the mud, the propriety—" "I said draft it," Damien barked. He stepped closer to Audrey, leaning down so his face was inches from hers. "You are making a mistake, little girl. You think you are saving your sister. You have no idea what you are walking into. My house is not a home. It is a tomb." Audrey didn't blink. "I'm good at digging." Damien's lip curled into a smile that didn't reach his eyes. It was a predator's smile. "Very well," he announced to the stunned room. "The youngest it is, pack your bags, Audrey. We leave in 10 minutes. The wedding ceremony the following morning was as bleak as a funeral. The village chapel smelled of mildew and unwashed wool. There were no flowers, no choir, and no guests other than Audrey's weeping family, and the indifferent lawyer, Mr. Finch. Audrey wore Beatrice's second-best white dress. It was too tight in the shoulders and too loose in the waist, pinned hastily by her mother's shaking hands. She did not look like a duchess. She looked like a sacrifice. "I, Damien, take thee, Audrey." The Duke spoke the vows with the same tone he used to order a whiskey. He did not look at her. He looked at the stained glass window, behind the vicar, his jaw set in a line of granite. When the time came for the ring, he slid a heavy band of gold and emeralds onto her finger. It was cold against her skin. "I now pronounce you man and wife." There was no kiss. Damien simply turned on his heel. "The carriage is waiting," he said. The farewell was brief. Beatrice hugged Audrey, sobbing with guilt. "I will write," she promised. "I will pray for you." "Don't pray," Audrey whispered, her eyes dry and hard. "Just make sure father pays the butcher with the money." The journey to Ashbourne Hall took 6 hours. For the first 4, not a single word was spoken. The carriage interior was upholstered in crushed velvet, luxurious but suffocating. Damien sat opposite her, reading a stack of ledgers, marking pages with a fountain pen. He seemed to have forgotten that she was there. Audrey watched the landscape change. The rolling green hills of her home gave way to the rugged grey crags of the Peak District. The trees became gnarled, the sky darker. It was a landscape that fought for survival, much like the man sitting across from her. "You have a question," Damien said suddenly, not looking up from his papers. "You have been staring at me for 20 miles. Speak." Audrey straightened her spine. "Why me?" "I told you. I needed a signature." "You could have had Beatrice. She is beautiful. She would have sat here quietly and looked pretty." Damien finally looked up. His eyes were unsettling, a pale, icy blue that seemed to strip away pretenses. "Beatrice would have spent the entire journey crying or asking me about my feelings. I have neither the patience for tears nor the capacity for feelings. You, on the other hand, seem practical." "Practical," Audrey repeated, tasting the word. "Like a plough horse. A plough horse is useful. A show pony is a liability." He closed the ledger with a snap. "Let us be clear about our arrangement, Audrey. I have cleared your father's debts. You are now the Duchess of Ashbourne. You will run my household. You will sit at the head of my table. And in time you will provide me with a son. Once the heir is born, you may do whatever you please. You may live in London, take lovers, paint watercolors, I do not care. Until then, you belong to Ashbourne." Audrey felt a chill that had nothing to do with the drafty window. "And if I refuse to be your broodmare?" Damien leaned forward, the shadows of the carriage accentuating the scar on his brow. "Then you breach the contract. Your father goes to debtor's prison, and your sisters will be all on the street within the week. Do not test me, Audrey. I am not a hero in one of your romance novels. I am a businessman." The carriage slowed. They passed through a massive stone archway, flanked by 2 gargoyles that looked as though they were screaming. "Welcome home," Damien said, his voice void of any welcome. Ashbourne Hall was monstrous. It was a sprawling Gothic revival pile of black stone turrets and ivy that looked like veins choking the masonry. It sat on a cliff edge, overlooking a churning grey sea. It was magnificent, imposing, and terrifying. As the carriage stopped, a line of servants stood in the rain. Damien stepped out, ignoring the footman's hand. He marched up the steps, leaving Audrey to scramble down by herself. "This is Mrs. Halloway." Damien gestured to a severe-looking woman in black bombazine. She had a face like a sour lemon and keys jangling at her waist. "She manages the staff. She will show you to your quarters. Dinner is at 8. Do not be late." And with that, the groom disappeared into the shadows of the great hall, leaving his bride standing in the rain. Mrs. Halloway curtsied, but it was a mockery of respect. Her eyes darted over Audrey's ill-fitting dress. "Follow me, Your Grace," she said, her tone suggesting she was addressing a stray dog. "We did not expect someone of your stature, so the mistress' suite is not prepared. You will sleep in the blue room." "The blue room is fine," Audrey said, lifting her chin. "I am used to sleeping in a room with 3 sisters. Solitude will be a luxury." Mrs. Halloway paused, surprised by the girl's steel. "Indeed. Follow me." 2 weeks passed. Life at Ashbourne Hall was a study in isolation. Audrey barely saw her husband. Damien would leave before dawn to ride the estate or visit the mines he owned, returning only for dinner. Dinner was a silent affair. They sat at opposite ends of a mahogany table, long enough to host a cricket match. The only sounds were the clinking of silver against china and the ticking of the grandfather clock. Audrey, however, was not one to sit idle. While Beatrice would have wept and Charlotte would have hidden, Audrey went to work. She started in the library. It was a chaotic mess of unfiled papers, dust, and neglect. Damien might be a ruthless businessman, but his domestic administration was in shambles. She found unpaid bills from local merchants, unanswered letters from tenants, and chaotic ledgers. On the 3rd Tuesday, she was deep in a stack of invoices when the door creaked open. "I didn't know the library had a new ghost." Audrey jumped, knocking a stack of papers to the floor. Standing in the doorway was a man who looked like a softer, more polished version of Damien. He had the same dark hair, but his eyes were warm brown, and his smile was easy, too easy. "Forgive me," he said, stepping inside and bowing with a flourish. "I am Reginald Thorne, Damien's cousin." "Reginald," Audrey said, standing up and brushing dust from her skirt. "The Duke has mentioned you. Has he?" "I'm flattered. Usually he pretends I don't exist." Reginald walked over, picking up a paper she had dropped. "The butcher's bill. How domestic. My cousin brings home a bride, and he has her doing his accounting. The man is a brute." "I enjoy it," Audrey lied. "It gives me something to do." Reginald sat on the edge of the desk, invading her personal space just slightly. "You are too young to be buried in this mausoleum, Audrey. May I call you Audrey, Your Grace? Makes you sound like a grandmother." "You may call me Duchess," she corrected him coolly. She had grown up around horses. She knew a snake when she saw one. Reginald laughed, a bright, charming sound. "Feisty. I like that. Listen to me, Duchess. Damien is a difficult man. He is damaged. Did he tell you about India, about the fire?" Audrey paused. "No." "Ah. He wouldn't. He has secrets, my dear. Dark ones. Why do you think he needed a wife so urgently? It wasn't just the grandfather's will. He needs an heir to secure the line because he knows his time is running out." "What do you mean?" "I mean," Reginald lowered his voice, "that Damien has many enemies, and he is not as invincible as he looks. Be careful, Audrey. If you need a friend in this cold house, my door in the east wing is always open." He winked and left. Audrey stared at the empty doorway. She didn't trust Reginald, but his words gnawed at her. Damaged. Fire. India. That evening dinner was different. Damien was in a foul mood. He had spent the day at the mines, and coal dust was still faintly visible under his fingernails. He ate mechanically, his brow furrowed. "Your cousin visited today," Audrey said, cutting a piece of pheasant. Damien's knife screeched against his plate. He looked up, his eyes dangerous. "Reginald was here inside the house." "Yes, he came to the library." Mrs. Halloway knows he is not permitted in the main house, Damien growled. What did he say to you? He welcomed me, which is more than you have done. Audrey put her fork down. He also said you have enemies, that you are in danger. Damien let out a harsh, barking laugh. Reginald is a gambler and a leech. He is angry because if I produce an heir, he falls out of the line of succession. He wants me dead, Audrey. He is not warning you. He is scouting you. He wants to know if you are weak. And am I? Audrey challenged. Am I weak? Damien looked at her. Really looked at her. She was wearing a simple grey dress, her hair pulled back severely, but her chin was high. She had spent the day organizing his chaos. He had seen the neat stacks in the library. No, Damien admitted quietly. You are not weak, but you are naive. Stay away from Reginald. That is an order. I am your wife, not your soldier. Do not give me orders. Damien stood up so abruptly, his chair fell over. You have no idea what monsters walk in the daylight. Audrey, I am trying to keep you alive. He stormed out of the room. Audrey sat in the silence, her heart pounding. It wasn't anger she had seen in his eyes. It was fear. The tension in the house snapped 3 days later. It was a day of torrential rain, the kind that turned the sky purple and the ground into soup. Audrey, feeling suffocated by the stone walls, decided to visit the tenant cottages. She had noticed discrepancies in the ledgers rents paid, but not recorded, and she wanted to investigate. She saddled a horse herself, ignoring the protests of the stable boy, and rode out toward the valley. The ride was liberating. The rain lashed against her face, washing away the stuffiness of the manor. She spent hours talking to the tenants, the Millers, the Smiths. They were wary at first, but when they realized the Duchess knew the price of barley and how to fix a leaking thatch, they opened up. They told her the truth. They paid their rent to Mr. Creevy, the estate manager, but Creevy had been telling Damien the tenants were refusing to pay. Embezzlement. Damien was being robbed blind by his own staff, and because he was so distant, so feared, no one dared tell him. Audrey turned her horse back toward the manor, her mind racing. She had to tell him. This was the key. If she could prove this, maybe he would respect her. Maybe the wall between them would crack. But she had stayed out too long. The storm worsened. The afternoon light vanished, swallowed by thick rolling fog. The moors were treacherous in the fog. The paths disappeared, and the boglands, the sinking sands, waited for the careless. Audrey's horse, a skittish mare named Bess, spooked at a crack of thunder. She reared. Audrey, an experienced rider, usually would have held on. But the saddle girth, worn and old, snapped. She was thrown backward. She hit the wet earth hard, the breath knocked out of her. Her head struck a stone, and the world spun into darkness. She woke up to the sensation of freezing water soaking her legs. It was pitch black. The rain was sleet now. She tried to move, but her ankle screamed in agony. Broken or badly sprained. "Help!" she screamed, her voice snatched away by the wind. She was alone on the moors miles from the house in a freezing storm. Panic, cold and sharp, set in. She dragged herself toward a rocky outcrop, shivering so violently her teeth chattered. This was how people died. Not by murder, but by the indifference of nature. She huddled under the rock, closing her eyes. She thought of her sisters. She thought of the cold, empty eyes of her husband. I will not die here, she thought furiously. I will not give him the satisfaction. Time lost meaning. The cold began to feel like warmth, a dangerous sign. Then through the howling wind, she heard a sound. A bark. then hoof-beats. Heavy, thundering hoof-beats that shook the ground. "Audrey!" The voice was a roar louder than the thunder. She tried to shout back, but her throat was frozen. She raised an arm. A massive black stallion burst through the fog. On its back was a demon, no a man. Damien. He wasn't wearing a coat. He was soaked to the bone, his white shirt clinging to his chest, his hair wild. He looked terrifying. He looked magnificent. He saw her. He leaped from the horse before it even stopped moving. He hit the ground and scrambled toward her, falling to his knees in the mud. "Audrey!" He grabbed her face with freezing hands. His eyes were wide, frantic. "Audrey, look at me. Open your eyes." "I'm cold," she mumbled. "You foolish, stubborn girl," he growled, but his voice broke. He ripped off his own waistcoat and wrapped it around her, then pulled her into his arms. He was shivering too, she realized. "You came," she whispered. "Of course I came," he snapped, lifting her up as if she weighed nothing. "Did you think I would let you die? You are my wife." He mounted the horse with her in his lap, holding her tight against his chest. He rode like a madman back to the manor. When they arrived, the household was in an uproar. Damien kicked the front doors open, carrying her into the great hall. "Get the doctor!" he bellowed at Mrs. Halloway. "And hot water, blankets, brandy now, or I'll fire every single one of you." He carried her up the stairs, not to the blue room, but to his own chambers. He laid her on the massive four-poster bed near the roaring fire. He didn't leave her to the maids. He knelt by the bed, chafing her hands, rubbing warmth back into her frozen limbs. His usual mask of indifference was gone. In its place was raw, naked terror. "Why," Audrey chattered, her teeth clicking. "Why do you care?" Damien stopped rubbing her hands. He looked at her, his hair dripping onto the sheets. "Because," he said, his voice rough, "when I saw your horse return without you, I felt a fear I have not felt since I was a boy. I realized." He paused, swallowing hard. "I realized the silence in this house would be unbearable if you were not in it." He leaned his forehead against her hand. "Do not die, Audrey. I forbid it." For the first time, Audrey didn't see a duke. She saw a man who had been alone for a very long time. She squeezed his hand back. "I told you," she whispered, a faint smile touching her blue lips. "I'm good at digging. I dug myself out." Damien let out a breath that was half laugh, half sob. He kissed her knuckles. It was a desperate human gesture, but the moment was interrupted. Mrs. Halloway entered, looking pale. "Your Grace," she said, trembling. "The doctor is here. But there is someone else." "Who?" Damien demanded, not letting go of Audrey's hand. "Mr. Reginald. He says he heard there was an accident. He has brought the local magistrate. He claims—" She swallowed. "He claims you pushed her Grace off her horse. He is accusing you of attempted murder." Damien went still. The tenderness vanished, replaced by the granite hardness. "So," Damien whispered, "it begins." The bedroom door flew open. Reginald Thorne strode in, flanked by Sir Tiago Weatherby, the local magistrate, and 2 constables. Reginald wore an expression of grave concern that looked almost genuine were it not for the glint of triumph in his brown eyes. "Oh, my poor dear cousin," Reginald exclaimed, looking at Audrey's pale form on the bed. "To think it has come to this. Sir Tiago, you must arrest him immediately before he finishes the job." Damien stood slowly. He was still wet, his shirt clinging to his muscular frame, but he loomed over the intruders like a dark tower. "Get out of my house, Reginald." "I'm afraid I cannot do that." "Lord Ashbourne," Sir Tiago said nervously. He was a portly man who feared the Duke, but he feared the law more. "Mr. Reginald has made a serious accusation. He claims you sabotaged Her Grace's saddle to induce a fall. Given your history and the terms of your grandfather's will requiring a wife, but not specifying she must remain a lame. You think I tried to kill her?" Damien's voice was a low rumble, vibrating with fury. "I saw the saddle." Reginald interjected quickly. "I was in the stables. The girth was cut. Sir Tiago sliced halfway through with a razor. It was a death trap." Damien took a step forward, his fists clenched. "If I wanted my wife dead, Reginald, I would not have ridden through a storm to pull her out of a bog. I would have let the cold take her." "A convenient rescue," Reginald sneered. "Makes you look the hero. But we know the truth. You need an heir. Maybe you found her unsuitable. Maybe you wanted to try again with the pretty one." "Beatrice," the accusation hung in the air. The constables put their hands on their truncheons. "Stop!" a voice rasped. Every head turned to the bed. Audrey was struggling to sit up. She looked frail, her hair matted with mud, but her eyes were burning with a feverish intensity. "Audrey, lie down," Damien said, moving to her side instantly. "You are hurt." "I'm not dead," she said, her voice gaining strength. She looked at the magistrate. "Sir Tiago, my husband did not cut the saddle." "Your Grace," Reginald said smoothly, stepping closer. "You are in shock. You don't know what you are saying. He is a monster. Everyone knows it." "The only monster in this room," Audrey said, locking eyes with Reginald, "is the man who has been stealing from this estate for 5 years. Reginald's smile faltered. "I beg your pardon." Audrey turned to Damien. "Get the blue ledger from the library, the one on the bottom shelf, and fetch the estate manager, Mr. Creevy." "Audrey, what is this?" Damien asked, confused. "Just do it," she commanded. 10 minutes later, the room was a makeshift courtroom. Mr. Creevy, a sweating, nervous man, was dragged in. The blue ledger lay open on the bed. "I spent the last 2 weeks analyzing the accounts," Audrey explained, her finger tracing a line of figures. "The tenants have been paying their rent in full, but the deposits into the bank account are 40% lower. The difference has been funneled into a separate account in London." She looked at Sir Tiago. "An account under the name R. Thorne." Reginald's face went white. "She's lying. She's delirious. Mr. Creevy," Damien said, his voice deadly calm. He didn't look at the ledger. He looked at the terrified manager. "Is this true?" Creevy collapsed to his knees. "I had no choice, Your Grace, Mr. Reginald. He knew about my gambling debts. He blackmailed me. He said you didn't care about the money." "And the saddle?" Damien asked, his voice dropping to a whisper that was louder than a scream. "Did he make you cut the saddle?" Creevy sobbed, burying his face in his hands. He said if the Duchess had an accident, you would be blamed. He said you would hang and he would inherit everything. He forced me to cut it this morning." The silence that followed was absolute. Damien turned to his cousin. Reginald backed away, bumping into a constable. The charm was gone, replaced by the desperate look of a trapped rat. "It was a kindness." Reginald spat his mask, falling completely. "You don't deserve this title, Damien. You are a cold, heartless killer. You killed that boy in India. I killed an assassin who was trying to murder the governor's daughter." Damien roared, the truth finally exploding out of him. "I took a knife to the chest to save a child. That is why I was discharged. That is why I came home." He lunged. Reginald shrieked, but Damien didn't strike him. He stopped inches from Reginald's face, his breathing heavy, his hands trembling with the effort of control. "I am not the killer you want me to be," Damien hissed. "Get him out of my sight." Sir Tiago nodded sharply. "Arrest Mr. Thorne and Miss Creevy. Attempted murder. Fraud. Take them away." As the constables dragged the screaming Reginald out, the room seemed to exhale. The storm outside had passed, leaving only the sound of the dying fire. Damien stood still, staring at the door. He looked exhausted, broken. "Damien," Audrey whispered. He turned slowly. He looked at her with a vulnerability that broke her heart. "You knew," he said softly. "You knew about the money. You knew that I wasn't a villain." "I knew you were a man who was hurting," Audrey said. She reached out a hand. "And I knew you were the man who signed a contract to save my family, even when you didn't have to." Damien walked to the bed. He sat down heavily, taking her hand in both of his. He pressed it to his lips, and this time there was no hesitation. "I thought I wanted a signature," he murmured against her skin. "I was wrong. I wanted a partner." The bedchamber was suffocatingly hot, the air thick with the scent of wet wool burning peat and the metallic tang of fear. Outside, the storm had not abated. It threw itself against the stone walls of Ashbourne Hall, as if trying to tear the fortress down, stone by stone. Audrey lay motionless on the massive four-poster bed, her skin the color of parchment, a stark contrast to the dark bruise blooming across her temple. Damien Thorne, the Duke of Ashbourne, stood by the window. He had refused to change his clothes. He was still drenched from the moors, his white shirt translucent and clinging to his chest, his boots leaving muddy rivulets on the expensive carpet. He stared out into the blackness, his hands clenched so tightly behind his back that the knuckles were white. Dr. Aris, a small, nervous man with spectacles that kept sliding down his nose, packed his bag with trembling hands. "She has a concussion." "Your Grace," the doctor whispered, as if speaking too loudly might shatter the Duke's tenuous control. "And severe exposure. The fever is the concern now. If she survives the night—" "She will survive," Damien said. He didn't turn around. His voice was not a hope. It was a command to the universe. "You may go. Wait in the kitchen." The doctor scurried out, glad to escape the oppressive weight of the room. Damien turned and walked to the bedside. He looked down at the woman who had stormed into his life with a shotgun and a scowl. In sleep, she looked younger, softer. It terrified him. He reached out his hand, hovering over her cheek, afraid that his touch, the touch of a man, cursed a man of violence, would only bring her more pain. "I should never have let you stay," he murmured to the silence. "I am poison, Audrey. And now I have poisoned you." The heavy oak door groaned open. Damien spun around the predator within him, instantly awake. It was not the doctor. Reginald Thorne stepped into the room, bringing with him a gust of cold air from the hallway. He was dressed impeccably in a dry, tailored suit, a silk cravat at his throat, and a look of performative sorrow plastered onto his handsome face. Behind him stood Sir Tiago Weatherby, the local magistrate, and two burly constables who looked as though they would rather be anywhere else on earth. "Damien," Reginald said, his voice dripping with faux sympathy. "My God, is she—" "Get out," Damien said. The words were low, vibrating through the room, like the growl of a cornered wolf. "If you take one more step, Reginald, I will throw you from the battlements." Reginald stopped raising his hands in a gesture of surrender, though his eyes danced with malice. He turned to the magistrate. "You see, Sir Tiago, the violence, the instability, it is just as I told you." Sir Tiago Weatherby cleared his throat nervously. He wiped sweat from his bald head with a handkerchief. "Your Grace, please. Mr. Reginald has come to me with extremely serious concerns regarding the nature of Her Grace's accident." Damien stepped between the men and the bed, shielding Audrey with his body. "Accident. My wife was thrown. The girth snapped." "Did it?" Reginald stepped forward, his voice hardening. "I was in the stables just now, cousin. I inspected the tack myself. The girth didn't snap from wear. It was cut, sliced cleanly through the leather with a razor, leaving just enough to hold until the horse was at a gallop." The room went deathly silent. The fire popped a sound like a gunshot. "You are suggesting," Damien said, his voice dangerously calm, "that I sabotaged my own wife's saddle." "Who else?" Reginald countered, dropping the act of the grieving cousin. "You need an heir, Damien. The terms of grandfather's will are clear. Produce a legitimate heir, or the estate is forfeit. But you didn't anticipate a wife who asked questions, did you? A wife who poked her nose into your precious ledgers. Perhaps she became inconvenient. Perhaps you thought you could be rid of her, play the grieving widower, and try again with a more docile bride. The eldest sister, perhaps." "You filth!" Damien snarled. He took a step forward, his hands curling into fists. "Restrain him!" Reginald shouted, shrinking back behind the constables. "He's a killer." "Sir Tiago. We all know what he did in India. He murdered a man in cold blood. He has a sickness in his mind." The constables hesitated, their hands hovering over their truncheons. "Lord Ashbourne," Sir Tiago said, his voice shaking, "given the evidence of the saddle and the tragic history, I have no choice. I must ask you to accompany us to the village lockup until an investigation can be conducted, for your own protection and for the safety of the Duchess." "You are taking me away from her." Damien's eyes were wild. "She is unconscious. She needs me. She needs protection from you." Reginald spat. "I will stay with her. I will ensure she is cared for." Damien laughed, a harsh, jagged sound. You would smother her with a pillow before the door closed." "Take him!" Reginald screamed. The constables lunged. Damien moved with the speed of a man trained in war. He shoved the first man back, sending him crashing into a vanity table. Bottles of perfume shattered, filling the air with the scent of roses and glass. "No." The cry was weak, barely a whisper, but it cut through the violence like a knife. Everyone froze. On the bed, Audrey was trying to push herself up. Her face was grey with pain, her eyes unfocused, but she was awake. She clutched the sheets, her knuckles white. "Audrey," Damien breathed. He abandoned the fight instantly, rushing to her side, ignoring the constables who regrouped behind him. "Lie down, please." "Don't. Let them," Audrey gasped, swallowing dryly. Her head was pounding with a rhythm that matched her heart, but her mind, her sharp, analytical mind, was fighting through the fog. She had heard them. Cut saddle, razor, India. She looked past Damien to Reginald. The man stood there, preening, confident that he had won. "Sir Tiago," Audrey rasped. Every word felt like broken glass in her throat. "My husband did not cut the saddle." "Your Grace," Sir Tiago said gently, stepping closer. You are confused. You have taken a nasty fall. You cannot know. I know, she interrupted, her voice gaining a fraction of steel. Because I know why the saddle was cut. She turned her gaze to Damien. The library. The blue ledger. Bottom shelf. Damien blinked, confused. Audrey, this is not the time for accounting. Get it, she hissed, her eyes flashing with a sudden, fierce energy. And bring Mr. Creevy. Drag him here if you must. Creevy. Reginald's composure cracked. A flicker of genuine panic darted across his eyes. The estate manager, what does he have to do with this? The Duchess is delirious. Sir Tiago, we must remove the Duke immediately so the doctor can sedate her. If you touch my husband, Audrey said, forcing herself to sit fully upright despite the room spinning, I will have you all charged with treason against the crown. Damien, the ledger. Damien looked at her. He saw the fire in her eyes, the same fire he had seen the night she walked in with the shotgun. He nodded once. He turned and marched out of the room, brushing past the stunned constables. The minutes that followed were excruciating. Reginald paced the floor, muttering to Sir Tiago about madness and hysteria. Audrey sat still, breathing through the nausea, her eyes fixed on Reginald. She was a hawk, and he was a field mouse. Damien returned. He held a thick blue-bound book in one hand and dragged a weeping Mr. Creevy by the collar with the other. He threw the man to the floor at the foot of the bed. Open it, Audrey commanded. Page 104. Damien placed the book on the bed. He opened it. His eyes scanned the columns. Sir Tiago, Audrey said, her voice stronger now, fueled by adrenaline. I spent the last 2 weeks analyzing the estate accounts. I found it strange that the tenants were so poor, yet the estate income was so low. I visited them today. They showed me their receipts. They have been paying full rent for 5 years. She pointed a shaking finger at the ledger. Those pages show the real income, and the column on the right shows transfers to a private bank account in London, an account held by a Mr. R.T. She looked at Reginald. Reginald Thorne. Reginald's face had gone the color of ash. Lies. Forgeries. She wrote them herself. Mr. Creevy, Damien said. His voice was terrifyingly soft. He looked down at the sobbing man on the floor. Is this true? I had to, Creevy wailed, clutching at the carpet. He made me. He knew about my debts in York. He said he would ruin me. He's been skimming the accounts since your father died. And the saddle? Damien asked. The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. Did he tell you to cut the saddle, Creevy? I didn't want to. Creevy screamed, pointing a trembling finger at Reginald. He said the Duchess was asking too many questions. He said she found the discrepancy. He said if she had an accident, you would be blamed because of your temper. He said you would hang, and he would inherit, and we would both be rich. The truth hung in the air, heavy and undeniable. Sir Tiago looked from the sobbing man to the open ledger, and finally to Reginald. The magistrate's face hardened. He was a man of the law, and he realized he had almost been made an accessory to murder. Reginald Thorne, Sir Tiago said, his voice booming with authority, I am placing you under arrest for embezzlement, fraud, and the attempted murder of the Duchess of Ashbourne. Reginald backed away, his eyes darting to the door. You can't prove it. It's his word against mine. Damien is the killer. Ask him about the boy in India. Ask him about the fire. Damien stood slowly. He walked toward his cousin. He didn't run. He didn't shout. He moved with the inevitable momentum of a glacier. You want to know about India? Damien asked, his voice cracking with raw emotion. You want them to know. He stopped inches from Reginald. I didn't kill a boy, Damien whispered, but in the silence everyone heard it. An assassin set fire to the nursery of the governor's daughter. I went in to get her out. The boy I killed was the man holding the torch trying to bar the door so a 6-year-old girl would burn to death. Damien raised a hand and touched the scar that bisected his eyebrow. I didn't get this scar in a duel, Reginald. I got it from a falling beam while I carried that child to safety. I never spoke of it because I didn't want glory. I just wanted to forget the smell of the smoke. He looked at his cousin with profound pity. But you are a man who would create a fire just to watch it burn. Reginald opened his mouth to speak, but no sound came out. He looked at the constables, then at Damien, and finally he slumped. The arrogance evaporated, leaving only a small, greedy man. Get him out of my sight, Damien said, turning his back. The constables seized Reginald. This time he didn't fight. He was dragged out, followed by the weeping Creevy and a profusely apologizing Sir Tiago. The door clicked shut. Suddenly the energy left the room. Audrey let out a long, shuddering breath and slumped back against the pillows. The adrenaline was fading, leaving only the throbbing pain in her head. The mattress dipped. Damien sat on the edge of the bed. He didn't touch her at first. He sat with his head in his hands, his shoulders shaking. Damien, she whispered. He looked up. His eyes were red-rimmed. The granite mask was gone, shattered into dust. You knew, he said, his voice thick. You knew about the money. You investigated. You almost bought because of it. I had to know, Audrey said. I had to know if my husband was a villain or a fool. A weak laugh escaped his lips. And a fool, she said softly. A blind, stubborn fool who lets people steal from him because he is too busy brooding in the dark to light a candle. Damien gazed at her. He looked at her muddy hair, her pale face, the sheer indomitable strength radiating from her small frame. He slowly reached out and took her hand. His fingers were warm now. I thought I was alone, he confessed, his voice breaking. For 10 years, since I came back from the East, I have been alone in this house. I thought I was unlovable. I thought I was destined to be the monster everyone whispered about. He lifted her hand and pressed his forehead against her palm. I married you to save my estate, he whispered. I signed a contract. But tonight you saved my life. Not just my neck from the noose, Audrey. You saved me. Audrey stroked his dark, damp hair. That is what a partnership is, Damien. It isn't about signatures or heirs. It is about watching the other person's back. He raised his head. His icy blue eyes were no longer cold. They were thawing, revealing a depth of emotion that took her breath away. I do not deserve you, he said, but I will spend the rest of my life trying to earn you. You can start, Audrey murmured, her eyelids growing heavy as the exhaustion finally claimed her by getting dry clothes. You are ruining the sheets. Damien smiled, a true, unburdened smile that reached his eyes. He leaned down and kissed her forehead, a gesture of infinite tenderness. As you wish, my Duchess, he whispered. As you wish. Outside, the storm finally broke. The wind died down, and through the heavy velvet curtains, the first grey light of dawn began to creep into the room. The long winter of Ashbourne Hall was finally over. And that is the story of how a muddy boots and a shotgun changed the fate of the Lord of Winter. It's a powerful reminder that sometimes the things we think we need, like status beauty or perfect obedience, are nothing compared to what we actually need: someone who challenges us, someone who digs us out of the mud, and someone who sees the truth when the rest of the world sees only rumors. Damien thought he was buying a wife, but he ended up finding his equal. What about you? If you were in Audrey's shoes, would you have stood up to the Duke, or would you have run for the hills? And honestly, do you think Reginald got what he deserved? Let me know in the comments below. If you enjoyed this story, please hit that like button. It really helps the channel. Subscribe and ring the bell so you don't miss our next historical romance saga. I have a story coming up about a pirate and a runaway princess that you won't want to miss. Thanks for watching.